Well, hello there. Since all the other teachers seem to think that we need to do something to keep you guys engaged, I decided that instead of reading a book, though as the reading specialist you would think that's what I would do, I would instead show you guys some of the things that I do when I'm not at school. So one of the things that I love to do is to bake. So yesterday I was going to bake cookies, and I had asked the question of whether or not or how I would get cookies to my friends if I wasn't allowed to visit with them. And some of the teachers gave some really good suggestions, as in put them on the doorstep, ring the doorbell, and run away, or I have a mailbox, or I'll run up to your house and get them, which I'm not really sure how that would eliminate the whole, social distancing. But anyway, I thought I would show you guys how maybe to cook some things, or some of the other things I do around the kitchen, such as making things that they used back when our kitchens weren't the way they are now, when you had to cook on an open fire, or we didn't have all the modern conveniences that we have now, what they did. Like, how did they make bread before we had yeast? Or how did they make vinegar and those type of things where we couldn't go to the store and just buy them. But today we're going to make cookies. So a lot of you have met my husband, John. He was a bus driver for a few years, and his favorite cookie is the oatmeal chocolate chip cookie. So one thing about cooking that is awesome, you can learn a lot of things about all the different subject areas that we talk about. There's math involved, there is science involved, there is even history involved, and obviously reading, because you have to read the recipe. Now, I have made these cookies so many times that I know the recipe by heart. But my grandmother was the one who wrote this recipe down, and if you guys decide you want to try and make these cookies, I will be happy to write it down and give it to you, post it somehow so all of you would have the same things that I have. Now, just as in the cooking shows, everything gets set up beforehand, so that's what I did, because the last thing you need is me walking all over the place and then coming back into the screen in order to do what we're doing. So the first thing you do when you're making cookies is you whip up the butter. Now I use real butter because, well, that's the way it should be. So 1 cup of butter, because I'm going to make a double batch, which means I had to double everything in the recipe. So the recipe calls for 1/2 cup, and one of these sticks is a 1/2 cup. So because I need to double it, I had to basically say what is 1/2 plus 1/2, and so 1/2 of a whole means I have a whole, which means I need 1 cup. Look at that, math. And I don't even like math. But I learned how to do fractions because I like to cook. So the first thing we do is we want to beat up all this butter and make it kind of soft and creamy and whipped a little bit. So here's my handy dandy KitchenAid mixer. And you notice it's a nice, well, you might not be able to see it. Hold on. Oh, it's a nice kind of green color. I don't know why green was what we ended up with, but, well, there we are. So for the next couple minutes, you're going to hear some noise because obviously the mixer has to do the blending. Now, if I was those fancy dancy cooking shows, I would have had another blender up here with it already blended. And I do have another blender very similar to this, but I'm not a fancy dancy cooking show. So I take a spatula and I want to make sure all this butter really gets mixed up and gets all blended together. Now, you saw how it went into the bowl, and now this is what it looks like. So next thing we do is we want to add the sugars. So we want to add regular white granulated sugar, and we want to add brown sugar. Now what I do so that I make sure it gets really incorporated is I like to mix it in a bowl and then mix the brown and the white together, which makes a really nice light color brown. Now, a little bit of history there. Brown sugar is basically white sugar, but it gets mixed with molasses. So molasses give it that darker color, which is why we have really light brown sugar and we have extra dark brown sugar. It all depends on how much of the molasses they put in it. And molasses is just another form of sugar. We use molasses to make gingerbread, or to make molasses cookies, duh. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the sugar, but I'm not going to add it all at one time because I want it to blend in evenly. And I just did what you do not do. You do not stick your fingers in your mouth while you're cooking. So I'm going to wash my hands yet again because washing our hands is what we need to do all the time. And I use paper towels to dry when I'm cooking because it's a lot easier because towels would just all the same stuff over and over and over again. So wash your hands in between. So we're going to blend again. And this takes a little longer because sometimes you have to push the butter off the beater so that it can get really incorporated into the butter, because we want this to be well mixed. We don't want any of the butter to just be kind of hanging out in the batter. Other things, we most definitely want the butter hanging out, but not cookies. And I just thought maybe I'll just pause till I mix and come back. Okay, I'm back. I have mixed up butter with sugar, so let us look at it. So you can see where it's no longer buttery and not just the white, and there's sugar all through it. And so our next step is to add the eggs. Now, I don't know if I told you how much sugar, but we needed a half cup of white sugar and a half cup of brown sugar. But I was doubling the batch, which means I need 1 cup of each, because 1/2 plus 1/2 is a whole. So next we're going to add the eggs. Now, eggs are an important part of baking because they help bind everything together. But a really good tip for eggs is you want them to be room temperature. Now, I know we always talk about you need to refrigerate eggs, and that's right, even though we are one of the only countries in the world where they refrigerate eggs. Part of that is the way we clean them and market them. But when we're cooking, you really want the eggs to be room temperature. And the reason is because when they're super cold, they don't break down as well. So that the white and the yolk of the egg kind of stays together more. And we want it to be broken down quickly, and we want it to be able to blend really well into the batter so that it can do its job. So I have 2 eggs, because I need 1 egg for the batch, so I need 2 eggs for whole, and I'm going to add just 1 at a time. So I just kind of make sure 1 yolk goes in there with whatever white wants to go in there, and then I'm going to blend this until it's completely mixed in. Now, can you imagine making cookies before our lovely electric blenders were invented? Everything had to be done with their arms. I tell you, those women were well muscled. So I mixed it all in really well, and the reason we want to do that 1 at a time is because it just mixes better if you do it 1 at a time. I don't know if you heard that beeping in the background, but that was my oven telling me my temperature was the way it needs to be so I can bake these cookies. And the temperature is 350 degrees, and you definitely want to preheat your oven, because if you stick cookies into a cold oven as it's heating up, you're going to either overbake them or not bake them enough. So I added my second egg, and now I'm going to beat this really, really well, so I'll be back in just a minute. All right, people, we're back, and I don't know if you can see this, but the batter is super whipped up and creamy now, because those eggs are all in there. And as you know, when we whip eggs, everything kind of gets fluffier. So our next step is to start adding flour. Now, you never want to add just all the flour all at once, because you're going to go, okay? All the flour is going to go all over the place. So I have flour mixed with, because you have to mix things, you have to have some baking powder and baking soda and some salt. And salt kind of just blends all and kind of mellows out some of the flavor so it doesn't get too sweet, because salt and sugar are opposites. So they're actually really good complementary things. You put salt actually on things that are too sweet, and it helps mellow them out. Or even too sour. better than sugar. So I'm supposed to have 1 cup of flour. So if I double it, I need now 2 because 1 plus 1 is 2. And if I also needed a half a teaspoon of baking powder. So this half is really what works here. So half a teaspoon of baking powder means I need 1 because I'm doubling. Half a teaspoon of baking soda, which means I need 1 because I'm doubling. And then I needed 1/4 or 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So if I double that, I needed 1/2. So I needed 2 cups of flour for my double batch, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then I kind of blended it with a wire whisk or a fork to get it all mixed in. You saw me just put a little bit in there, and we're going to blend it low speed because I don't want flour going all over the place because then I have to clean, and I do not like to clean. So there, that little bit is already mixed in, and you start to see how it's starting to really thicken up. So I'm going to add some more of my flour mixture. This time I added a little more than last time, so let's see how much I poof up. Not so bad. Blend that really well together. Now it's getting thicker, so you have to blend more. And lock it. There you can see it getting even thicker. And then, oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot the vanilla. Silly, silly me. Let's see where my vanilla is. Way back there. So here's a great thing, guys. I make my own vanilla extract. So I have vanilla beans, which are these long pods, and you slice them, and then the seeds and vanilla flavor are inside. So I slice them and kind of open them up a little, and then I stick them in either a brandy or a vodka because then it flavors it, and that's what we add to our cooking, and it gives it a slight vanilla flavor. So I have this made, and I forgot to add it. So usually you would add this right after the eggs. And so I need about a teaspoon, but again, because I don't cook with anything, I'm just going to, there, that's about a teaspoon. And a little more, a little less isn't a huge deal when it comes to the vanilla extract. If you were going to use a stronger extract, then you have to be careful because some of them can be quite strong. So now I'm going to blend the last bit of flour in there along with my vanilla. So I'm going to do it a little longer than I might normally do it. So I want to make sure that vanilla gets in there. And then I'm just scraping the sides because you want to make sure that all of the flour and all of that vanilla goodness is mixed in. And when you're baking, when you're mixing with a mixer, sometimes it will stick to the side. All right. Now, I did say they were oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. So I have my oatmeal. And again, 1/2 cup was what we would use for one batch. I'm making 2. So therefore, I have a whole cup of oats. And that just gets mixed in. And sometimes at this point, your dough is going to be so thick that you might have to just do it by hand. And it looks like that is going to be the exact case for me. Because as you see, all the dough is sticking on my blender mixer here, my beater. And for those of you who have recently learned some prefixes from me, you know that is a prefix that means a person who, or the object that does. So this lovely contraption here is called a mixer because it mixes. And this is called a beater because it beats. And I am the baker because I'm baking. I am also right now the mixer because I have to mix those oats into my batter. Get it in there. And as you can see, it is quite thick. Probably wasn't a very helpful. Let's see. And I probably should be using a spoon. So I'm going to pause it a minute and go get a spoon. Okay, I'm back. I have my handy dandy wooden spoon. And I love wooden spoons because they are strong and they don't break or bend like a metal spoon can sometimes. And they're really good about helping you turn and get this stuff in here. So when I was a kid, I remember being I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, I'm not sure which, and we had someone come in and do this exact thing in front of the whole school. And one of the things she did was she had people come up and taste the vanilla extract. Because even though it adds a great flavor to your baking, it does not taste good when it is just it by itself. And I remember that I was one of the volunteers to go up and try the vanilla extract. And that cured me from ever thinking I wanted to try it again. Because it smells super good, but it does not taste super good. So now it's time to add the chocolate chips. And I like the little mini ones. Because I feel like you get a whole bunch of chocolate without being a big, those are small, right? But I like mini. I don't like the big chunks so much. I feel like I can blend them in. And I never measure chocolate chips because why would you measure chocolate? So I just dump and stir. And again, here I am. I am the mixer, as well as the baker, as well as your talker today. Videographer? I do believe that's the term. Okay. And because I never measure, sometimes I end up with a lot more than I need. Good thing I'm super strong. Nice. No idea how long this video is going to end up being. But I definitely won't let you sit there for 8 minutes while I bake them. Okay, so I have them all mixed in. I don't know how well you can see that. Probably my lighting isn't the best. So, the batter is now ready to bake. And as with any good cook, clean up your mess. So I have my pans all ready to put my cookies on my pan. This here is my favorite pan. Any good baker with her salt has her favorite. And this is my favorite because nothing sticks to it. Now, because of all the butter that's in these cookies, you do not need to grease your pan. Some things you have to grease because there's not enough butter or oil in it, which requires that you grease it. But this you do not. Here's my handy dandy scoop. So it looks like an ice cream scoop, except it's a lot smaller. And I have, probably 8 of them. No idea why. But this is the perfect size for the perfect size cookie. So you just go in, there it is, and you put it right on your tray. And there, I have my perfect size cookie ready to bake. And so I will put 6 on this pan because you definitely want to give it space because obviously your cookies are going to flatten out. And if you do not give it space, they will stick together. Now, if you don't have a scoop like I do, you can just use 2 spoons and do the same thing. It just won't be quite as uniform. So let's see. I will get 2 spoons to show you. So I take a spoon and you kind of put it on there and then you just take it off with your other spoon. And this cookie is going to be a little bigger than my regular scooped cookies, but there you go. So see, you can do it with spoons, which is that one, or you can do it with a scoop, which is all of those. And then they go into the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. So I'm going to go bake these, and then I'll start my video up again, so you can see how wonderfully delicious they look when they're done. Okay, everybody, we're back. It's been 9 minutes, because with cookies in ovens, you never know. So they tell you, you start out low and then you move up. So here are the first batch of cookies. That lighting is horrible. Maybe I should tone it down. There, that's a little better, not quite. Now the thing about cookies is when they're on the plate or the pan, they're going to continue to cook. So depending on the cookie, you have to take it off immediately or you don't. So these are not a cakey cookie. So a cakey cookie is going to bake up sort of like a piece of cake, and you can take them off right away because you want them to cool and you don't want them to cook anymore, because if you do, they get too dry. These are not a cakey cookie, so I need to leave them on the pan, and you can tell they're starting to lower themselves. They're all nice and brown around the edges, so it gives it that little crispiness. And I'm going to let them sit on this, because if I take them off too soon, they're just going to fall apart and become a mess. So I'm going to set them on my racks, and I made 2 more trays, not my favorite pans, but they work. And since they both fit in, I now can make 2 trays of 6, which is 12, which means I now have 1 dozen cookies cooking at one time versus half a dozen cookies cooking at a time. So because the last pan took 9 minutes, I'm setting that for 9 minutes instead of 8, because that's how long it'll probably take. Every pan is different. So actually, you know what? I should probably stick to 8, because since every pan works differently, and now I just shut it off. So the pan I had before is a lighter pan, so lighter pans can tend to cook differently. Those are darker pans. They can cook differently, and I just wanted to show everybody. Here's my lovely camel mug, because I had to make a cup of tea while I was waiting for those to cook, and don't I love my tea, and it just tastes better coming out of my camel mug, which has this nice little lid. Look, he's watching you, which helps keep it warm. So I'm going to move, wait a minute, what am I missing? Spatula. Wooden spatula, life is good. So I'm going to move it over here, because they have now cooled. You only need to have them cool for about a minute. And you can see the cookies. Do not touch the hot pan, because if you do, it will become a burned pan. So, you know what? My wooden spatula is not going to work. Hold on, I gotta go get another. Okay, I'm back. Much thinner edged spatula, which works a lot better. So you just get up under there, and you want to cool them before you eat them. Now, if John was here, he would be stealing one right now, because he likes them nice and warm. And so I was interrupted. John called. So my cookie has actually cooled so much that I can just pick it up and put it on my tray. So what's really cool about chocolate chip cookies is Toll House is one of the first brands that ever made chocolate chips. And they did it because a woman that worked for the Toll House Inn added chocolate to her basic cookie recipe. And so when she did that, the cookies were a huge hit. And so she ended up selling her recipe and the idea of using chocolate in the cookie to Nestle, who makes the Toll House cookie, and agreed that her recipe could go on the back of the bag. And in return, she didn't get money, mind you, she got a lifetime supply of chocolate. So as a lover of chocolate, I would be torn as to which I would prefer, a big chunk of money or a lifetime supply of chocolate. So the first chocolate chips, when Nestle first did it, they would just have, when they sold the chocolate, they would actually include a little tool in which to chop the chocolate up. And then eventually, over time, they invented what we call a chocolate chip, where it would hold its shape a bit, and it would be much smaller, and therefore the baker would not need to chop up their chocolate for the chocolate chip cookies. So I have put these in for 8 minutes. I don't know if you guys can see, but those are not done. The top is super wet, super moist, so we're going to need to actually go up. So I'm going to put it up for 1 more minute, because the last batch needed 9, so this one might need 9 too. Or I might find it needs 10 because the pan just requires a little bit more. Also, there are 2 pans in the oven, and when you put 2 pans in an oven or 2 things in an oven, it's going to take longer to cook something because there's more that the heat has to encircle and cook. Back to my lovely mug. Lovely. So, I'm going to go get a cookie and show you. See? And the end is super crispy. I don't know if you could hear the crisp, but I could in my head. Perfect chocolate chip oatmeal cookie or oatmeal chocolate chip cookie. Either way, so in today's lesson, you learned how to make chocolate chip cookies. You learned about math because we had to double everything. You learned about science a bit because the eggs hold everything together. Baking soda, baking powder all work for keeping it the way it needs to be, the leavening in it. You learned a history. Where did chocolate chips come from? How were they invented? And I had to read the recipe. You didn't have to read the recipe, but you will if you ask me for it, and I have to write it down. So, my first video, we'll see how this works. You guys tell me how much you enjoyed it. Bye.